The sun had barely risen when I pulled into the narrow winding road leading to my new home in the countryside. I'd never been this far from the city before, and everything around me felt so vast and open. I could almost see my new life unfolding, like a picturesque scene from a magazine. Little did I know my arrival was going to be anything but smooth. Just as I started to feel a glimmer of excitement about the move, disaster struck. The road was muddy from recent rains, and my car, a once reliable SUV, decided it had had enough of the countryside's charm. It skidded, spun its wheels hopelessly, and then settled, stuck fast in the muck. Frustrated and with no idea what to do next, I stepped out of the car, the squelching sound of mud beneath my boots echoing my sinking feeling. I tried to push the car out, but the tires just spun more wildly. I was on the verge of calling a tow truck when a truck came into view down the road, bouncing over the uneven terrain. The truck slowed to a stop, and a tall man with a rugged face and kind eyes emerged from the driver's side. He wore a plaid shirt and worn jeans, a classic look for a farmer. As he approached, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and embarrassment. "Looks like you're having some trouble," he said, his voice warm and inviting. I sighed with relief. "You could say that. I'm pretty much stuck here. I just moved in up the road, and I guess I underestimated how muddy it would be." "No problem," he replied, giving me a reassuring smile. "I'm Scott. I can help you get out of this mess." With that, he walked over to my car and began assessing the situation. I watched as he expertly maneuvered his truck into position. He hooked up a tow strap, and within moments, the powerful pull of his vehicle had my car free from the mire. I felt a wave of gratitude wash over me. "Thanks so much," I said, feeling a bit sheepish. "I'm Carol, by the way. I'm new around here." "Nice to meet you, Carol," Scott said, giving me a friendly nod. "I figured as much. Not many folks drive up this road without knowing what they're getting into." I laughed nervously. "Yeah, I guess I'm learning that the hard way." Scott's easygoing manner helped ease my tension. He made a quick check to ensure my car was back in working order and offered some advice on how to handle the tricky road conditions. "Just take it slow and steady," he advised. "And if you need anything, don't hesitate to ask. I live just down the way on the Smith farm." "Thanks, Scott. I appreciate it," I said, feeling genuinely grateful. With the sun setting, casting a warm, golden hue over the countryside, I watched Scott's truck rumble away, its dust lingering in the evening air. My car, now free of its muddy predicament, was in no condition to continue its journey. My new house was still in disarray, furniture scattered, boxes yet to be unpacked, and no proper place to stay. The reality of my situation began to sink in. Scott's offer to stay the night at his farm seemed like the most practical solution. I took a deep breath, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. I still had some reservations about staying on a farm with someone I had just met, but it was either that or a night in a half-empty house with no electricity or running water. I drove the short distance to the Smith farm, following the well-worn path Scott had directed me to. The farm's sprawling landscape came into view, rolling fields, a rustic barn, and a cozy farmhouse with a welcoming porch. As I parked my car and approached the house, Scott was there to greet me with a friendly wave. "Glad you could make it," he said, opening the door and motioning me inside. "Come on in. Let's get you settled." The interior of the farmhouse was warm and inviting, with a mix of old-fashioned charm and practical comfort. Scott showed me to a guest room, modest but comfortable, and then led me to the kitchen, where a simple meal was already cooking. "I figured you might be hungry," Scott said as he stirred a pot on the stove. "I made some stew. It's a farm favorite." I was touched by his hospitality. "Thank you, Scott. I didn't expect to be treated to a home-cooked meal." "No trouble at all," he said with a grin. "It's the least I can do after getting you out of that mess." After dinner, Scott suggested we take a walk around the farm. As we strolled through the fields, he pointed out various parts of the farm: the barn, the pasture where his cows grazed, and the vegetable garden where he grew much of the produce used in his kitchen. "You're welcome to help out tomorrow if you're interested," Scott offered. "There's always something to do around here, and it's a good way to get a feel for farm life." I agreed, eager to dive into this new experience. "I'd like that. I could use a bit of distraction and a way to familiarize myself with the surroundings." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of roosters crowing and the scent of fresh coffee wafting through the house. Scott had already started his day's work, and he invited me to join him. My first task was to help him feed the chickens and collect eggs. It was a far cry from my city life, but there was something oddly satisfying about the routine. Scott was patient and kind, explaining each step as we went along. He showed me how to handle the animals and gave me a crash course in farm chores. As the day went on, I found myself becoming more comfortable with the tasks and more fascinated by the rhythm of farm life. We spent the afternoon working together in the vegetable garden. I learned to identify different crops and helped with planting and weeding. Scott's easy manner and genuine enthusiasm made the work enjoyable, and I began to see the farm as more than just a temporary refuge. By the time evening rolled around, I felt a sense of accomplishment and a growing connection to this new way of life. As we sat on the porch, enjoying the cool evening air and the view of the setting sun, Scott and I chatted about our lives. It was clear that while my adjustment was just beginning, I was starting to feel a real sense of belonging. I looked out at the fields, now bathed in twilight, and realized that maybe this farm, and the man who had so graciously opened his home to me, would play a bigger role in my new life than I had anticipated. The days at the farm settled into a comfortable routine. Each morning began with the same invigorating rhythm, feeding the animals, tending to the garden, and enjoying hearty farm breakfasts. But it was the evenings that I looked forward to the most. After a day of hard work, Scott and I would sit on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything and anything. One such evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, we found ourselves in the middle of one of our long conversations. I leaned back in my chair, savoring the cool breeze, and glanced at Scott, who was relaxing with a cup of coffee. "You know," I began, "I never really thought I'd end up here. My life in the city was so different, busy and noisy. I used to work in finance, always chasing deadlines and meetings. Moving to the countryside was a big change." Scott looked at me with interest. "I can imagine. What made you decide to leave all that behind?" I took a moment to gather my thoughts. It wasn't an easy decision. I wanted a change, a break from the chaos. I was looking for something more, fulfilling, I guess. And when the opportunity came to buy that house, it felt like a sign. He nodded thoughtfully. "I understand that. I grew up on this farm, and there's something special about the simplicity of it all. I've always been drawn to the land and the way of life here. It's not always easy, but it feels right." Our conversation drifted to our expectations of country living. I was curious about Scott's perspective on the lifestyle I was still getting used to. "So, what's it really like living here?" I asked. "Is it always this peaceful?" Scott chuckled. "Peaceful, yes, but not always easy. There's a lot of hard work involved, and the weather can be unpredictable. But there's a certain satisfaction in seeing the fruits of your labor, in knowing that you're contributing to something that sustains you and the community." I smiled, feeling a growing appreciation for the lifestyle I was beginning to embrace. "That sounds rewarding. I've already noticed how different the pace of life is. It's more relaxed, but also more hands-on." Scott leaned forward, his eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. "Exactly. And there's a lot to learn and experience. From the animals to the land, there's always something new. But the best part is the sense of community. People here look out for each other." As the evening progressed, our conversation deepened. We shared stories from our past, revealing more about ourselves than I had initially intended. I learned that Scott had a passion for art, something I hadn't expected. He showed me some sketches and paintings he'd done, which surprised me with their beauty and intricacy. "I never would have guessed you were into art," I said, admiring his work. Scott shrugged modestly. "It's a hobby I picked up over the years. It helps me unwind and connect with the world differently. What about you? Do you have any hobbies or interests?" I hesitated, then admitted, "I used to paint a little, but I haven't had much time for it lately. Maybe I'll get back into it now that I'm here." We talked about our dreams and aspirations, discovering more common ground than I'd anticipated. We both valued a sense of purpose and the importance of meaningful connections. Our shared interests in art and a desire for a more fulfilling life seemed to draw us closer together. As the night wore on, I realized that Scott and I had found a surprising amount of common ground. Our conversations not only helped me understand him better, but also made me feel more at home in this new chapter of my life. Something was comforting in knowing that, despite our different backgrounds, We were beginning to build a connection based on mutual respect and shared values. Under the starlit sky, I felt a sense of belonging that I hadn't anticipated. The farm and Scott were becoming integral parts of my journey, and I was beginning to look forward to what the future might hold. The days had been busy, filled with a flurry of farm chores and the slow but steady progress of adapting to rural life. Scott had been incredibly helpful, always willing to lend a hand, whether it was fixing a leaky faucet in the house or teaching me how to tend to the animals. His kindness and patience had not gone unnoticed, and I found myself growing more comfortable and appreciative of his company. One particularly grueling day, the work had been endless. I had spent hours weeding the garden under the hot sun, and my muscles ached from the labor. As I trudged back to the house, my spirits were flagging. The thought of a warm, comforting meal was all that kept me going. When I walked into the kitchen, the aroma of something delicious wafted through the air. Scott was at the stove, stirring a pot of what looked like a hearty stew. The sight of him, focused and content, made me feel a wave of relief. "Hey there," he said, looking up and giving me a warm smile. "I thought you might be ready for a break. I've got dinner almost ready." My eyes widened with gratitude. "You didn't have to do this. I could have managed something simple." Scott waved off my protest. "Nonsense. It's the least I can do after the day you've had. You've been working hard." We settled at the kitchen table, and the evening began to take on a more relaxed and intimate tone. As we ate, Scott regaled me with stories from his childhood on the farm. He spoke of mischief with his siblings, the challenges of farming, and the joys of working with his family. His tales were filled with a mix of humor and nostalgia, and I found myself laughing and enjoying his company more than I had anticipated. In turn, I shared my own stories, my life in the city, the frantic pace of corporate life, and my decision to move to the countryside in search of something more meaningful. It felt good to open up about my past and my hopes for the future. As the evening wore on, the conversation shifted to more personal topics. We talked about our dreams and fears, our experiences with love and loss. The vulnerability in our discussions created a deeper connection between us, and I could sense that Scott was sharing more with me than he had with anyone in a long time. There was a moment when we both fell silent, the air between us charged with unspoken feelings. Scott reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine as he refilled my glass. His touch was gentle, and for a moment, I felt a flutter of something that went beyond friendship. "I'm really glad you're here, Carol," Scott said quietly, his gaze meeting mine. "You've brought a lot of light into this old farmhouse." I felt a warm flush spread across my cheeks. "I'm glad I came too. This place, and you, have made this transition easier than I ever imagined." As the evening drew to a close, we lingered at the table, savoring the moment. Scott's gesture of cooking dinner and our shared stories created a bond that felt both natural and profound. The connection between us had grown from simple companionship to something more meaningful. When I finally headed to bed that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this evening had been a turning point. The warmth and intimacy we had shared left me with a sense of anticipation for what might come next. As I lay in bed, I replayed our conversation and the tender moments we had shared. For the first time, I began to entertain the possibility that what I felt for Scott might be something more than just friendship. The simple gesture of a homemade dinner had transformed into a significant moment, one that would shape the course of my new life in the countryside. And as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder where this unexpected connection with Scott might lead. As the weeks rolled by, life at the farm began to feel like a new normal. The initial awkwardness of adjusting to rural living had given way to a rhythm that felt almost comforting. My days were filled with farm chores, and each evening was a welcome respite spent in the company of Scott. Our routine had settled into a pattern that was both productive and pleasant. The more time Scott and I spent together, the more I found myself looking forward to his presence. We would start the mornings with coffee on the porch, chatting about the day ahead, and then spend the day working side by side. Our conversations had evolved from simple pleasantries to deeper discussions about our hopes, dreams, and personal histories. There was a palpable shift in the air between us. What had begun as a friendship was now tinged with a subtle yet undeniable attraction. I noticed it in the way Scott's gaze lingered on me a little longer than usual, or how his touch seemed to linger on my arm when he offered assistance. I felt it in the fluttering sensation in my chest whenever our hands brushed, or when our eyes met in shared moments of silence. One crisp autumn evening, we decided to take a break from the farm work and go for a walk through the fields. The setting sun cast a golden glow over the landscape, and the air was cool and refreshing. We walked slowly, savoring the quiet and the beauty of the countryside. "This place is incredible," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "I've never seen sunsets quite like these." Scott nodded, his eyes reflecting the warm hues of the setting sun. "Yeah, there's something special about it. It's one of those things you start to appreciate more when you spend time here." We continued walking, and I could sense the tension in the air, a blend of excitement and nervousness. The conversation flowed easily, but there was an underlying current that neither of us could ignore. As we approached a small secluded spot near the edge of the property, Scott stopped and turned to me. "You know, Carol, having you here has been really good for me. I didn't expect to connect with someone so quickly, but I'm glad we did." His words, spoken softly, sent a shiver down my spine. I looked up at him, meeting his gaze. "I feel the same way. You've made this transition so much easier, and I've enjoyed every moment we've spent together." Scott's expression softened, and he took a step closer to me. There was a vulnerability in his eyes that mirrored my feelings. "I've been thinking about this a lot lately. There's something about being with you that feels different, in a good way." My heart raced as I took in his words. The attraction between us had been building, and now it felt like it was reaching a tipping point. I took a deep breath, feeling a mixture of anticipation and longing. "I've felt that too. There's a connection here that I didn't expect, but I can't ignore it." Scott reached out and gently took my hand, his touch sending a spark of electricity through me. He leaned in slightly, his breath warm against my cheek. "Can I kiss you, Carol?" The question, though simple, held a world of meaning. I nodded, unable to hide the smile that spread across my face. "Yes." With that, Scott closed the distance between us and pressed his lips to mine. The kiss was soft and tender, a perfect reflection of the growing bond between us. As we pulled away, our foreheads touched, and we shared a moment of unspoken understanding. In that simple gesture, everything seemed to fall into place. The attraction we had been feeling was now openly acknowledged, and it felt right. We stood there, wrapped in the warmth of the moment, knowing that our connection had blossomed into something deeper and more meaningful. The rest of the evening was spent in a state of contentment and closeness. As we walked back to the farmhouse hand in hand, the world around us seemed to take on a new, brighter hue. The growing attraction between us had transformed into something beautiful, and I couldn't wait to see where this new chapter of our lives would lead. The harmony that had enveloped our days at the farm was disrupted one crisp afternoon. Scott and I had been working on a new project, a much-needed overhaul of the vegetable garden. What I had thought would be a straightforward task quickly turned into a battleground of differing opinions. "I think we should rotate the crops this year to prevent soil depletion," I suggested, hoping to bring a bit of modern farming insight into our approach. Scott frowned as he examined the soil. "I've always done it this way. Rotating crops isn't necessary if you manage the soil right. It's a lot of extra work for no real benefit." My frustration bubbled up. "But things change. We should be open to new methods if they might improve our yield. It's not about dismissing what you've always done. It's about making things better." Scott's expression hardened. "I know what I'm doing, Carol. This farm has been my life. I don't need someone coming in and telling me how to run it." The words stung more than I'd expected. I hadn't meant to undermine his experience, but I couldn't ignore my growing frustration. Our debate escalated into a full-blown argument, each of us stubbornly defending our point of view. The tension was palpable, and for the first time since moving here, I felt a deep sense of uncertainty. I spent the rest of the afternoon working alone, the weight of our disagreement heavy on my shoulders. As the sun set and shadows lengthened, I couldn't shake the feeling of doubt that gnawed at me. Was moving to the countryside the right decision? Could I continue to live and work in an environment where my ideas and opinions seemed unwelcome? When I finally returned to the farmhouse, the atmosphere between Scott and me was strained. We avoided eye contact, and dinner was a silent affair. After eating, I retreated to my room, needing space to think. Later that night, I heard a knock on my door. Scott stood there, his face tired but sincere. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. I nodded, and we sat down on the edge of the bed. The silence between us was uncomfortable, but Scott broke it first. "I'm sorry for how I reacted earlier," he began. "I didn't handle the situation well. I've been feeling defensive about the farm, and I took it out on you. Your opinions matter to me, and I should have listened better." His apology was a balm to my wounded feelings. "I didn't mean to upset you. I just wanted to contribute in a way that I thought might be helpful. I'm still learning and trying to find my place here." Scott reached out and took my hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. "I appreciate that you're trying to help. It's just that I've been doing things a certain way for so long that it's hard to change. But I value your perspective and want to work through this together." We spent the next hour discussing our differences, each of us laying out our points of view. We talked about why certain methods were important to Scott and how my suggestions might fit into the existing practices without disrupting everything. In the end, we found a compromise. We agreed to experiment with a small section of the garden, using my proposed method, while maintaining the traditional approach for the rest. It was a solution that satisfied both of us and allowed for gradual change. As we concluded our discussion, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The reconciliation brought a renewed sense of clarity and hope. I realized that disagreements were a natural part of any relationship, and finding a way to work through them was key to building a strong partnership. Scott hugged me tightly, his warmth enveloping me. "I'm glad we talked. I want us to be able to share our ideas and work through challenges together." "Me too," I said softly. "I'm looking forward to figuring things out with you." The next morning, we resumed our work with a renewed sense of unity. The tension from the previous day had dissipated, and we approached the tasks with a cooperative spirit. The farm felt like home again, and the bond between us was stronger for having weathered the storm. As the sun rose over the fields, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges of farm life were real, but so were the connections we were building. And I was more determined than ever to make this new chapter in my life a success, both for myself and for the future that Scott and I were shaping together. With the storm of our first argument behind us, Scott and I found a new rhythm in our relationship. The tension had dissipated, replaced by a palpable sense of closeness that had grown since our reconciliation. The days seemed to stretch out in a comfortable blend of work and shared moments, and it became clear that our feelings for each other were deepening. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the farm, Scott and I found ourselves on the porch again. The day had been productive, with the garden starting to show signs of our combined efforts. We sat side by side, the quiet of the countryside settling around us. "I've been thinking a lot," Scott began, breaking the comfortable silence. "About us." I turned to him, curious and slightly nervous. "What have you been thinking?" He looked out over the fields, gathering his thoughts. "After our talk the other night, I realized how much I care about you. It's more than just friendship or companionship. I'm attracted to you, Carol, and I want to explore what this could be." My heart raced at his confession. I had been feeling the same way but hadn't yet found the courage to express it. "I've been feeling the same," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "I care about you a lot, Scott, and I want to see where this could go." Scott turned to face me, his expression earnest. "So, what do you say? Do you want to take this to the next level and officially be together?" I felt a rush of happiness and relief. "Yes, I'd like that." From that moment on, our relationship took on a new dimension. We began officially dating, and it felt like a natural progression of the bond we had been building. The change in our dynamic was both exciting and comforting. We shared more intimate moments and began planning activities together that went beyond the daily routines of farm life. Our new relationship status also brought a sense of stability and confidence in my role on the farm. I felt more integrated into the life Scott had built here, and my responsibilities began to feel less like tasks and more like parts of a shared journey. I threw myself into the farm work with renewed enthusiasm, knowing that Scott and I were building something meaningful together. We spent weekends exploring the nearby countryside, enjoying picnics under the wide-open sky, and attending local events that brought the community together. Each outing felt like a new adventure, and I cherished the time we spent discovering more about each other outside of the farm. One afternoon, while we were working on a new project in the garden, Scott paused and looked at me with a smile. "You know, you've taken to this life. I'm proud of how you've embraced it." I smiled back, feeling a sense of accomplishment. I couldn't have done it without your support. Being with you makes everything better. Scott reached out and took my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. I'm glad we're on this journey together. It feels right. As we continued our work, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The challenges of farm life were now shared with someone who mattered deeply to me, and our relationship was becoming an integral part of my new life. I no longer felt like an outsider, but rather like someone who had found a place and a person to call home. The farm had transformed from a mere backdrop to our love story into a living, breathing testament to our shared dreams and aspirations. Each day brought new opportunities to grow, both as individuals and as a couple, and I was eager to see what the future held for us. In the warmth of Scott's presence and the comfort of our growing relationship, I found a renewed sense of purpose and joy. Our journey together was just beginning, and I was excited to embrace every moment of it. As the days grew warmer and the countryside blossomed into vibrant colors, Scott and I found ourselves settling into a comfortable routine. Our relationship had grown stronger, and we began to look towards the future with excitement and anticipation. One evening, as we relaxed on the porch with a cup of tea, Scott broached a topic that had been on his mind. I've been thinking, Scott began, glancing over at me with a thoughtful expression. You've become an integral part of my life here, but I want us to be more involved in the community as well. There are a lot of local events and traditions that we haven't explored yet. I raised an eyebrow, intrigued. What kind of events are you talking about? Scott's eyes lit up with enthusiasm. Well, there are a few annual festivals and fairs that the town holds. They're great for meeting people and getting a feel for the local culture. There's also a community potluck coming up this weekend, and I think it would be a fantastic opportunity for us to get to know our neighbors better. The idea excited me. While I had embraced the farm life and my new role with growing confidence, participating in local events felt like the next step in truly becoming part of the community. That sounds wonderful. I'd love to be involved in those events. It would be great to connect with more people and feel like I belong here. Scott smiled, clearly pleased with my response. I'm glad you're on board. The potluck is a casual affair, but it's a good chance to meet people and show off some of the great dishes you've been cooking. And the festivals are a lot of fun. Live music, local crafts, and food stalls. It's a big part of what makes this place special. Over the next few days, Scott and I prepared for the upcoming potluck. We spent time discussing what dishes we might bring and how we could make a good impression. I decided to prepare a batch of my favorite homemade cornbread, which I hoped would be a hit with the locals. The day of the potluck arrived, and we drove to the community center, which was bustling with activity. Tables were set up in a large hall, each covered with an array of homemade dishes. The aroma of delicious food filled the air, and there was a lively buzz of conversation and laughter. Scott and I arrived with our contributions and began setting them out on the table. As we arranged the food, several neighbors approached to introduce themselves. They were warm and welcoming, and I felt a genuine sense of belonging as we chatted and exchanged stories. Throughout the evening, Scott and I mingled with the crowd, sampling different dishes and learning more about the people in our new community. It was heartening to see how supportive and friendly everyone was, and I felt increasingly at ease with each passing moment. By the end of the evening, as we headed home, I reflected on how far I had come since arriving at the farm. The transition had been challenging, but the support from Scott and the opportunity to be involved in the community had made a significant difference. As we drove back under the starlit sky, Scott took my hand and squeezed it gently. I'm really glad you enjoyed the potluck. You fit right in, and I think everyone was impressed with your cornbread. I smiled, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. It was a wonderful experience. I'm starting to feel like this place is truly home, and I'm grateful for the chance to be part of it. Scott's smile widened, and he looked at me with affection. I'm glad you're feeling that way. There are a lot more events and activities to look forward to, and I'm excited to share them with you. As we reached the farmhouse, I knew that our journey together was just beginning. Embracing the community and participating in local events helped me feel more connected and confident in my new life. With Scott by my side and the support of the town, I felt ready to continue building our future together, one event and one shared moment at a time. Our life on the farm had been filled with so many positive changes and growing connections, but not all aspects of our new life were smooth sailing. As we settled into our routines and deepened our relationship, we encountered unexpected turbulence from an unlikely source: Scott's family. It started subtly. I began to notice the tension in Scott's voice when he mentioned family gatherings or conversations. At first, I dismissed it, thinking it was just the usual family dynamics, but soon enough the issues became more apparent. One crisp autumn afternoon, Scott received a call from his sister Emily. The conversation was terse and left him visibly upset. When I asked him what was wrong, he hesitated before revealing the full extent of the problem. "My family. They're having a hard time accepting our relationship," Scott admitted, his voice strained. "They've always been traditional, and they're not exactly thrilled that I'm dating someone from outside the community. They think I'm rushing into things and making a mistake." The news hit me harder than I expected. I had hoped for a smooth transition into our new life, but it seemed like Scott's family was adding an unexpected layer of complexity. I could see the stress and hurt in his eyes, and it pained me to know that our happiness was being overshadowed by external conflicts. "I'm sorry, Scott," I said gently, taking his hand. "I wish things were easier with your family. I'm here for you, though, and we'll get through this together." Scott's gratitude was evident. "Thanks, Carol. I just don't want this to come between us. I know it's not fair to drag you into family drama, but I'm struggling with how to handle it." I squeezed his hand reassuringly. "We'll face it together. Let's not let this pull us apart. I'm committed to making this work, no matter what challenges come our way." The family issues were indeed challenging, but we managed to navigate them with mutual support. Scott and I made an effort to communicate openly about our feelings and concerns. Whenever I saw him struggling with farm-related issues, I stepped in to help, whether it was with physical labor or simply offering encouragement. On the flip side, Scott was equally supportive of me as I continued to adjust to rural life. He helped me tackle the hurdles of integration into the community, and his patience and understanding made a world of difference. Together, we found ways to address the issues on the farm and strengthen our bond despite the external pressures. One particularly tough day, as we worked side by side in the garden, Scott's frustration with his family's resistance was palpable. I could see the strain on his face as he tried to balance his responsibilities with the emotional toll of the situation. "Hey," I said softly, taking a break from our work. "I know things are rough with your family right now, but I want you to know that I'm here for you. You don't have to go through this alone." Scott looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and exhaustion. "I don't know what I'd do without you. Your support means everything to me. I'm grateful that you're willing to stand by me through this." I reached out and wrapped my arms around him, offering a comforting hug. "We're in this together, Scott. We'll handle everything as a team. We're building a life together, and that's what matters most." Slowly, the strain of the family issues began to lessen as we faced the challenges together. We learned to balance our love and support for each other with the external pressures that sought to disrupt our harmony. The difficulties with Scott's family remained a part of our journey, but they no longer overshadowed the joy we found in our relationship. Through the ups and downs, we discovered that our commitment to each other and our shared vision for the future were stronger than any external obstacles. And as we continued to navigate the rough waters, we grew closer and more resilient, finding solace and strength in our partnership. The crisp autumn air brought with it the promise of a much-anticipated local event, the Harvest Festival. It was a time when the entire town gathered to celebrate the bounty of the season, and Scott and I were excited to be part of this cherished tradition. The festival was held in the town square, which had been transformed into a vibrant, bustling hub of activity. Colorful stalls lined the streets, offering everything from homemade pies and jams to handcrafted decorations. The aroma of roasted corn and fresh cider filled the air, mingling with the sounds of laughter and live folk music. As Scott and I arrived at the festival, we were greeted by familiar faces from the community, all eager to share in the joy of the occasion. Scott had been involved in organizing the event, and his pride was evident as he showed me around. We stopped at various booths, sampling local treats and chatting with friends and neighbors. "This is fantastic," I said, taking in the festive atmosphere. "I'm so glad we're part of this. It feels like we're becoming a part of the community." Scott smiled, his eyes twinkling with happiness. "I'm glad you think so. It's moments like these that make all the hard work worthwhile. Plus, It's a great chance for us to celebrate together. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden hue over the festival, we made our way to the main stage, where the evening's entertainment was about to begin. Local performers took to the stage, singing and dancing in celebration of the harvest. The lively music and enthusiastic crowd created an atmosphere of joy and camaraderie. Later in the evening, as the festival began to wind down, Scott and I found ourselves standing near a bonfire, the warmth of the flames providing a cozy contrast to the cool night air. We stood close together, wrapped in each other's arms, taking in the beauty of the night. "I've been thinking," Scott said, his voice soft and thoughtful. "This festival is a perfect example of how special this community is. And it's moments like these that make me grateful for everything we've built together." I looked up at him, feeling a deep sense of contentment. I couldn't agree more. It's been an incredible journey, and being part of this celebration feels like a true affirmation of our place here. I'm so glad we're sharing these experiences. As the night continued, the festival reached its climax with a stunning display of fireworks. The sky lit up with bursts of color, and the crowd gasped in awe. Scott and I watched, our fingers intertwined, feeling a profound connection to each other and the community around us. The fireworks seemed to mirror our sense of joy and fulfillment. At that moment, amidst the vibrant display and the warmth of the community, I felt a deep appreciation for the life we were building together. The challenges we had faced and overcome had only strengthened our bond, and celebrating this special occasion with Scott made everything feel even more meaningful. As the festival drew to a close, Scott and I took a stroll through the town square, the remnants of the celebration still visible in the twinkling lights and cheerful decorations. We reflected on the day's events and shared our hopes for the future. "I'm looking forward to more moments like this," Scott said, his voice filled with anticipation. "Times when we can celebrate our successes and be grateful for the life we're creating together." I nodded, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. "Me too. This festival has been a beautiful reminder of how far we've come and how much we have to look forward to." As we walked back to the farmhouse, the crisp night air was filled with the promise of more adventures and shared experiences. The Harvest Festival had been a joyous celebration, not only of the season's bounty, but also of the life we were building together. As we embraced the beauty of the rural life we had chosen, I knew that our journey was just beginning, filled with more moments of connection and celebration to come. As the seasons continued to shift and the countryside transformed with each passing month, Scott and I found ourselves reflecting on the journey we had shared and the future we envisioned together. Our relationship had deepened over time, built on a foundation of mutual respect, support, and love. We knew it was time to take the next step and solidify our commitment to one another. One chilly winter evening, as we sat by the fireplace, Scott and I found ourselves deep in conversation about our future. The warmth of the fire and the quiet of the snowy landscape outside provided the perfect backdrop for this important discussion. "I've been thinking a lot about our future," Scott began, his voice steady and earnest. "I can't imagine my life without you, Carol. I want us to build something lasting together, to create a future where we both feel fulfilled and happy." I looked at him, feeling a surge of emotion. "I feel the same way, Scott. This life we've built together has been amazing, and I can't wait to see what more we can create. What do you have in mind for us?" Scott took a deep breath as if gathering his thoughts. "I think it's time for us to start planning a future together, not just as a couple, but as partners in every sense. I'd like us to look into expanding the farm and maybe even starting a family someday. What do you think?" The idea of a shared future and the prospect of growing our life together filled me with joy. "I love that idea. Expanding the farm sounds exciting, and the thought of starting a family is something I've always dreamed of. I'm ready to embrace all of it with you." Over the following months, Scott and I began to make our dreams a reality. We started by discussing and planning the improvements we wanted to make on the farm. Together, we envisioned new projects and ways to enhance our home, turning it into a place that truly reflected our shared vision. We also began looking at potential new additions to the farm, from more sustainable farming practices to new livestock and crops. The process of planning and working on these projects brought us even closer, as we collaborated on every detail and supported each other through the challenges. The excitement of creating our future together also extended to our home. We worked on renovating and decorating, making sure every corner of the house was filled with love and warmth. The farmhouse, once just a place where we lived, became a reflection of our life and relationship, filled with personal touches and memories. As we settled into our new routine and completed the renovations, Scott and I felt an overwhelming sense of contentment. The farm had become more than just a place to live. It was a symbol of our shared dreams and hard work. We took pride in the life we had created together and looked forward to the future with hope and excitement. Our relationship continued to grow stronger, marked by the deep understanding and affection we shared. We found joy in the simple moments, whether it was working together on a new project, sharing a meal, or enjoying the beauty of the changing seasons. One sunny afternoon, as we stood in the middle of the farm, taking in the fruits of our labor, Scott turned to me with a smile. "Can you believe how far we've come?" I smiled back, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. "It's been an incredible journey, and I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm so grateful for the life we're building together." Scott took my hand and held it gently. "Here's to our future, to all the adventures and milestones we'll share. I'm excited for every step we'll take together." As we stood there hand in hand, the future seemed bright and full of promise. Our journey had brought us closer than we ever imagined, and the life we had chosen was one of love, partnership, and shared dreams. The farm was no longer just a place where we lived. It was the heart of our new life together. With each passing day, our bond grew stronger, and our love deepened. We had found happiness in the life we had chosen, and as we looked toward the future, we knew that whatever challenges and joys lay ahead, we would face them together, united in our shared vision and commitment